to this Instagram Live. Today I will talk to Annika Nährlich, who is a changer into politics, who wants to move into politics, and she is part of the Volt program, which is called Team Europa. And Team Europa is for people who always wanted to get active into politics, maybe never knew how to really do it. And it's a trainee program for everybody who is really interested into going into politics. They get like some courses on it and so on. And so many people applied. Annika was one of them who got taken. And she wants to run as well for Volt on the list for the European Parliament. And I'm very excited to talk to her about the Euro crisis from 2009, because it was an emotional thing for me as well, and for her, because she's very much into economics. And so when I heard this, I definitely had to ring her up and talk to her about it, and said, like, let's make an Instagram live about it and see like what to see like what went wrong back then, what changed, and what could be done better in the future with it. So let's see. I want to add her now. So it's there it is. And by the way, she works at the World Bank, so she's quite much into economics. And there she is. And
Hi, Stefan.
hello, Annika. So I adjust my camera a bit because now yes, that looks fine. Hello. So I said some things about you already. I saw that you listened to it, but maybe you can tell something more about yourself. What makes you go into politics? What's your background?
Sure. So for those who don't know me, my name is Annika. I'm from Leipzig originally, from the east of Germany. I'm currently 31 years old, and I'm working almost for 6 years now for the World Bank, mainly on the financing of local capital markets, or the development of local capital markets to mobilize financing into key projects like sustainable infrastructure or affordable housing or SMEs, for example. And the reason why I wanted to switch into politics or become more active is that I'm seeing that we are now at the moment, the point in time where it's really crucial to make significant changes in the EU and actually also in German politics, but they're just not happening. And I feel like particularly our fiscal and economic policy, which is, among others, the root for the climate change crisis that we currently have and our socio-economic issues that we have, they're just not changing. And they're the same old people in it. And I just feel like it needs a bit of fresh air and new ideas in those type of institutions. That was actually the reason why I joined the World Bank, and that's also now the reason why I want to join the EU.
All right. So you're saying basically, in the end, it's all about money, the economy, and it all comes down to this problem. So like,
Yeah,
kind of like this.
more
Yeah.
or less, at least, money makes the world go around. So if you know how
Yeah.
to channel the money to the places where it's truly needed, which in our cases now is climate change, and in my sense also socioeconomic issues. Like if you look at the EU and inequality we have, way more money needs to go in creating new jobs and creating have a better social protection system in the EU. Can talk about this for hours, but this is currently not happening, and the money goes to other areas where it shouldn't go. So yeah, I think there's a significant influence you can have if you can channel that better.
Yeah. And so today, let's take a look back, because the Euro crisis back then was basically the moment for me where got really politicized. And when I went back to Greece quite recently, it really put me on an emotional roller coaster when I was visiting the Syntagma Square, because I always watched it in the news and people demonstrating there, and there was so much hate going on in Europe, the lazy Greeks and the Nazi Germans and so on, and it was really clashing. And it was more like, you felt like it's so much about nationalism again, not about like being European in a way. And but how did you feel back then when it was hit in the Euro crisis in 2009?
Very similar than you, actually. And when I was hearing your YouTube videos and also actually your Instagram on this, I was like, oh, thank God, there's someone else that felt the same way. Because actually around me, and particularly, you know probably better than me, the way this was portrayed in the media was just so aggressive in Germany. And I had so many friends who were saying, oh, these lazy Greeks, we German, we have to pay for them. It's kind of, and then I was thinking in a way, if you think about actually what that means in German, like Schuld, it's the same thing like, guilt. So it's truly like kind of a moral kind of obligation in Germany. And I felt like that's what we truly tried to do. Instead of helping the Greeks, we tried to make them feel guilty about what they've been doing and pay for their errors. And I felt like the media is portraying this so strongly instead of seeing how many people actually also in Greece are suffering, and that the people that truly kind of got rich in this were a very small niche top that was very corrupted, and the rest of the country was just suffering so much and is still suffering so much so many years after, that it was just like you were literally, like you were saying, it's like in a sense traumatic that we were able to do this and watch it from Germany, and then on top of it have this kind of hateful journalism around it.
Yeah, that's why I actually want to talk at some point to a Greek person about this topic. I haven't found one yet, but I will see in the future, because we are both members of Volt, Annika and me, and Volt is the pan-European party which tries to connect Europe, and that's something like this, that just Germans talk about Greeks and Greeks just talk about Germans never happens again. And yeah, the thing is, but now we are talking more about the economic side, and we try to make it like as understandable as possible and not dive too much into nerd terms. We talked about this earlier. And what do you think, like, what should have been done differently back then?
So if you look about, maybe just as a short recap, trying not to be too technical in the sense, what happened is, like, okay, we saw Greece had a huge amount of debt, and the EU and the IMF came to the conclusion it's unsustainable, they have to reduce it. Now, in very rough terms, there are, I would say, three ways you can reduce debt. One is to say, okay, we have to raise taxes significantly, and we have to go for an austerity program, meaning we have to cut costs significantly. But usually you would do that after a crisis, not during a crisis, which was actually the option that was chosen for Greece, right? That they, in the middle of an economic crisis and financial crisis, they decided to raise taxes and cut public costs significantly. The second option could have been to say, which they also to some extent did, but less so, is to write off debt significantly, to say, okay, we borrowed money to you, we took the risk, right? Usually also, if you think about it, I'm working in finance, right? So whenever I, for example, give as part of the World Bank, we give a loan to a private sector company, we assess the credit risk a certain private company has. The same goes for a government, they have a credit risk, right? So you get an interest rate based on the credit risk, but it means not that you get your money back. Doesn't matter what's going to happen. It might well be that, like in the case of Greece, this country is unable to pay back. That's a risk you take. So usually as a creditor or as a bank, you should be prepared for this case to happen. And in the case of Greece, they have written off some of that debt, I think around 100 billion or so. But in the big scheme of things, it was relatively small and not sufficiently enough for Greece to get a kickstart and actually recover economically. The third option, which I believe would have been the best option, in combination maybe with the second one, is to say, let's try to grow out of it. So if you actually look, and it's a nice story in that sense, if you now look how Greece developed over the years, and when they were able to bring debt down, it was always in periods of recovery and economic growth, not during times where they tried during a recession to cut costs. If you actually look at the results of the program, they have now the same level of debt to GDP than they had during the crisis, so it didn't really do much. So truly, really, the best strategy in my eyes would have been to help Greece recover quickly and grow out of its debt, and help it grow through investments in the private economy, creating jobs. At the same time, I would have done, which I think the IMF has to some extent tried to advocate as well, and they've done to some extent, but not significantly, is to have structural reforms. Because as we We do know that the institutions in Greece have an issue with corruption. And I think this is also a cost. It's a cost for everyone, not only for the EU. It's a cost for the private sector as well and for the Greek economy, because money goes ways where it shouldn't. So this you need to address as part of heavily investing in the economy and helping Greece to kind of grow out of its debt issue. But this is something, unfortunately, that did not happen.
Yeah, the thing back then was there was this Troika. Many people maybe who are listening still remember this. It was three institutions which were in there: the European Central Bank, the EU Commission, I think it was, and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF you talked about earlier. And these all together lent money to Greece so it can pay off their debts, you know. And the thing is that most of this debt repayment went back to the countries who, of course, loaned the money to Greece. Because if Greece couldn't have paid their debt, they would have a problem as well, because then they would have to write off debt, and then you get like the machine going and it gets all down the hill from there. So, but the other thing is, of course, when people say like, hey, the interest rates in Greece are very high right now, but we will lend you money for lower because we want you to repay your debt, you know. And then they had this memorandum of understanding back then. They said like that you should do some stuff like cut wages, not cut wages, but cut I think it was the rent, not rent.
Pension.
What's the English word for it? Pensions, right? Yeah, you cut pensions and so on because we give you money for it. And you are saying that, but cutting during a crisis is not the right way to go, but investing. So we talked about this earlier, and maybe like I personally can somehow understand that when people lend you money for low interest rates, they want to get something for it. So a solution maybe would be, when you want to invest, that the Troika, the three institutions, would actually invest in Greece, but they have a much greater say in where to invest it. Would this be a solution? Would this be a solution then?
For sure. So several things I think you mentioned, I think they're important to talk about. One is absolutely the question you also need to ask as part of this is, who did the EU or the Troika really bail out, right? And you were already referring to it, is that partially, and you can also see it actually if you look at the discussions between the different institutions, you see that the hardest stance was taken by the EU institutions themselves. And it was partially because they wanted to bail out EU banks. So it was not so much truly from the beginning, how do we help Greece to get better? But again, it was more about how do we save our own ass, sorry for the language, but this is truly what happened. And to some extent, make them pay for the errors. So this is one thing I think to think about. And what was interesting to see is that actually, Greece went through it's called economic adjustment programs. It's a term the IMF uses, and I know very well how they're structured because I work with them quite a bit. But they basically mean they get money in return for getting certain reforms done. And as part of this economic adjustment programs, it was actually interesting to see in the third and final bailout package, the IMF was actually saying, listen, guys, we are not sure this fiscal adjustment and austerity program is working. It looks like currently that it's actually exacerbating the debt burden because economic activity is just dying. So the government can't collect as much tax as they wanted to or needed to. And the second thing is that they were actually saying, we're also not sure that the neoliberal policies that we were kind of forcing on the countries are as good to encourage growth than we previously thought. And yet the EU institutions didn't move almost a millimeter from their stance of, we need that money to be paid back. And I think this was partially because they saw their own banks. They kind of chose the commitment to the banks as a superior commitment than the Greek government had to its own public citizen. So the Greeks the first priority was pay back the banks. If you are unable to pay your pensioners, too bad. So truly what happened was like you said, they cut social spending. And it's interesting, I was just before our call checking the numbers, because the ILO, the International Labour Organization, did a very interesting study on this. They checked what's the social protection spending of Greece vis-a-vis the other European countries. And if you look at it today, which is now a little bit better than it was back then, it's still that they spend roughly 4,000 like 4,000 euros per person on this, whilst the average in the EU is 6,000. So you can see that, and this is, they have almost a difference of 2,000 euros per person. And this is still a consequence up until today from the austerity program. So whenever a Greek person is unemployed or goes into pension, they barely get any money. Health spending was significantly cut. And you can see that today, like I had a similar experience when you went back to Greece. When I went to Athens, I was walking through the streets and I have not seen or expected so much poverty and people living on such a low limit in Europe, in a lot of countries. So I was very shocked, and you truly can see this low spending of the government up until today. Last point, and I'm sorry I'm talking too much, but just on the point you were referring in terms of the solution. Yes, absolutely. The important part would have been control the spending, meaning you as a EU can decide where the money goes. So it's not about just allow Greece to spend and then, say the government spends it on, I don't know, buying itself caviar or God knows what luxury products they would like to consume, but tie it to something that is a growth-led spending, meaning invested in productive sectors like infrastructure, building affordable housing, education, research, innovation. So something that is very targeted and supports the economy to grow.
Yeah, there's one question in here from Karina. She said, couldn't the problem be wanting to make the big money even in or especially in times of crisis? And that's basically, I don't know if that's what you were referring to, or I understand the question correctly, but basically you are saying that the EU wanted to save their own banks by saving Greece. That's what you're saying, right?
That's what I'm saying, yes. And I don't know if that refers to the question as well, but
yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure either. Maybe reframe it, Karina, if we misunderstood this question. But then, like, when actually, like, one little thing on there, I think there was a study somehow showing how many of the loans the Europeans, except Greece, lent to Greece went to the Greece public. And it was like, I think 5% or something, or 10%. It was like a really low number. And most of the money went back to the people who loaned their money before. And of course, you can always say, yes, Greece loaned the money before and invested it wrongly, maybe even. But then, like, you can't just say, like, it's just like altruism to save Greece there, because it was basically saving Europe, and you had the Greece to suffer for it in a way, And then when you are saying when the Troika actually invests in growth-related things, then the economy grows out of it, and it's better for all of Europe because they can actually pay their debt back earlier. Because the Troika actually, I realized this when I was visiting Greece, left last year. So they went. Though there was over, like, I think 10 years or something, the Troika was still in Greece and had like power there. And this is crazy for a long time of recovery, as you are saying that there is so much poverty in the streets. So let's see like how much recovery that really was. But the thing is, did you see like that from the experience there and from the debates back then, did something change in the EU in handling such crises?
Yeah, so I think and this is something discussed a lot in Volt as well, is I think a tiny bit changed, but I think I would call it forced change, and this is with the COVID-19 crisis. I mean, if you look at our current fiscal and debt policy, which is something that urgently needs to change, but the policy is kind of coming out of this financial crisis, right? So we have, it's called the I think Growth and Stability Pact, which is kind of limiting annual fiscal spending at 3% of GDP, and public debt ratio at 60%.
So it's like a limit on how much you can
correct.
borrow.
How much you can spend, or how much you can go into the deficit, and how much you can borrow. And this comes out of this period, and we still have it today, which goes for every national nation state we have in the country. Now, with COVID, we had this issue that suddenly we had a crisis coming where we needed a lot of money, right? And these limits were a huge issue with it, because, for example, Greece, that never truly came out of this recession. I think there was also a super interesting article, I think from the Financial Times, I don't remember, that Greece is actually the country now that has been in the longest time in recession. So they were hit by the pandemic hard. And at the same time, they could not pay for the costs. So what changed in the EU, and that was kind of for me a truly beautiful moment actually as an economist, is that the thinking changed, including with the Germans. So we switched from, okay, we are not borrowing jointly and we're not giving any flexibility in terms of these limits, to, yes, there's flexibility. Currently, this kind of targets or limits do not need to be respected in times of COVID, number one. And second is we have something closer to joint debt, meaning the EU started through several bonds and also through the recovery fund, that is, I think, up to 800 billion to borrow together. So this is something that truly changed, and also in the sense of, before legally it was not allowed, and now it is allowed. But let me just see what Karina.
Yeah. I'm trying to put it into other words. Karina said, like, don't use so much abbreviations. But basically, what you are saying is, if the Troika would have invested back then, it would have been mutual debt, like debt that all countries together share, and in Corona, and there was a no-go back then. They said, like, no, we don't have a shared thing, because then Germans have to share the same burden as Greek or as Italians and so on, and we don't want any shared debt there. So, and with the Corona crisis, it was a different mindset. I think it was because of the Greece crisis maybe as well, or the Euro crisis. It was not only Greece. That they said, like, come on, let's try to find something where we can borrow together. Because the thing is, when you borrow together, your credit rating goes up. Like when you are a country who is in deep shit, you have to pay a lot of interest rates for lending, for borrowing money. But when all European countries together do it, the investors who lend you money think like, oh, well, it's the European Union, they have good credit rating, I will give less interest rates. So in all, we have to pay less for the borrowed money. Then, like, the Corona bonds, which were issued back then, were not real European bonds, because, like, don't get into the technicalities, they were not real European bonds anyway. And but it was some change, and actually our Volt MEP Damian Böselager was in this committee which were bartering about this. So he made this happen as well, which I think, like, we as Volters can be pretty proud of, that we have someone in there who did this. And but then, like we said, it's not like real shared debt. So, but the thing is, there's always like the thing, like, yeah, but can we actually do this, because there's so many different economies, and there's so much, some banks in some countries have very more toxic papers, papers like loans which can run out of very soon and get torn down everything. So like, what do you think what do we need today? Like, what should happen in the European Union to have like a more mutualized and more common approach to financial crisis?
Maybe just coming back to Karina's comment on abbreviations, I think the only one I use, please correct me if I'm wrong or right, is GDP, which is like a gross domestic product, and it's nothing else than BIP, like a Bruttoinlandsprodukt. Sorry for
the power of the economy.
And if
Huh? No, I just meant, like, the GDP is basically, it measures the power of the economy. I wanted to. Now you're down. You're back. You're back again. Yes.
Sorry. I don't know what's
No
happening
worries.
with my internet. You would think after COVID the connection will be more stable, but no. So just on the abbreviation, on in terms of what needs to change, I think, and this is something maybe tying the loop to the very beginning, why I'm so passionate about coming to politics now and trying to change things in the EU, in the EU policy, is that we're now at a time where we need to spend more because we are actually not. First of all, we're not out of the crisis. So COVID still has a big impact in a lot of countries in terms of our economic situation. Second is we have a climate crisis coming. And as you can see, for example, in other countries like the US or China, they show us what the right path is, meaning we need to heavily invest in green technology, in green sectors, in green infrastructure, but that doesn't work under the current debt and fiscal policy that we have because it limits countries. And I think there was also, again, I will have to check the reference, but there was an interesting study done showing that if this policy stays in place, exactly 4 countries can afford a green industrial policy. And it's obviously only the rich countries. So it means Germany can invest a bit and in the Nordic countries, and that's roughly it. So the rest really is struggling to do anything when it comes to green. However, we know that climate is not a national problem, right? It needs ideally a global solution, but at the minimum, it needs an EU solution. So in order for us to get this done, we have to change our debt and fiscal policy. This limits that we have, they have to become more flexible. And ideally, what I would do is I would tie them to investments. So to allow to kind of motivate or encourage governments to invest in green sectors. You could, for example, tie also the limits and the targets to the SDGs, which is like the Sustainable Development Goals, or just to certain climate targets. Or you could, at the minimum, tie it to public investments in sustainable sectors like electric vehicles or railway or God knows what. But you could make sure that if a government is investing in the economy that have a positive long-term effect and ideally has a climate angle to it, then these kind of investments are exempt from this strong and strict fiscal rules. That could be, for example, something that would give more flexibility. And go ahead.
No, and this way, the EU would have some kind of say. The same with Greece back then with the Troika. You know, the EU would have some say, like, if you want to go over this limit, you can only invest it into green investment. That's the thing, right? And then, like, you are not like afraid that they just go over it to buy luxury cars for all the politicians or something.
Exactly. So if
Yeah.
you tie it in some way to the goals that are now important to us, which is for me the sustainability goals, it should always have a social angle as well. It has a green angle, but yes, it should align with our economic policies. And currently it doesn't. There's no flexibility to this at all. The other thing that is currently, I mean, we talked about it already, but it will be key for it is to consolidate debt and ideally have joint debt issuances because it will make it cheaper for everyone. And ideally, if it's well done, and you would say, okay, how does this differ from what has been done under COVID? It would differ in the sense, one, it wouldn't be just under an exceptional basis. B, the debt, and you can see this in the market, which I find always fascinating, is the debt would truly be seen as joint in the sense of it's not currently, the debt is backed by guarantees of member states. So for example, Germany, let's say there's an EU bond, Germany is guaranteeing this debt up to, I don't know, 10-20%. I'm making up a number, but just to give you an idea that it's limited to what they can guarantee it. This is, for example, I think with the SURE bonds. Don't ask me what this agreement stands for. It's a very long COVID program, I think, against unemployment risk, that they have specifically created in order to borrow that. So if you would have a debt issuance that is truly guaranteed by an EU budget and by EU revenue, not just by member state guarantees, this would make a difference, and hopefully it would also convince the market, because if you look at how the market prices these bonds currently, it's not priced at close to what Germany, for example, is paying, or France, which should be or Denmark, or whatever it is, but that should be the case if you truly think it's a joint debt, because you would go closer to the price of the best issuer or borrower, but currently it's actually closer to the least well off, or the borrower that has a less strong track record when it comes to debt sustainability. So it shows you that the market actually is currently very skeptical about this jointness, and I think this is partially because there is no true EU money behind it, but it's still based on member states. So that is something that needs to change as well.
I know it's kind of long already, but still, when you say about EU money, you know, when you think about it, the EU itself doesn't have that much money. It's all in the nation states, right? Like the EU budget is maybe, I don't know, like 1% of GDP or something of the economic power of all, and the nation states, they have all the power, they have all the economic power. So if there were to issue common bonds, the people who lend money to Europe would need to be sure that Europe itself can collect the money.
Correct.
But that's not possible, because it would need that the EU can issue taxes. And it's basically, it could do this, but then like every country has to say yes. So there's still a veto, and of course, not of course, but it's still like this, that we don't have this European closeness, this Europeanism, that we say like, yes, of course we are Europeans, we pay European taxes, you know. And I think the first step would be like to abolish this majoritarian vote, this veto on taxes, because then you can issue the first taxes, you have an own money supply. And of course, I have to say like, oh, taxes, even more taxes, we pay already so much. Maybe we have to see like some taxes which are at a national level, do that at the European level, you know, that's not more tax burden, but you just shift it towards Europe, and it's a close, and it will develop over time. And then, of course, you need a finance minister, a European government, which can actually like collect these taxes and so on. Then Europe itself would have actually like an own fiscal policy, which means it can earn money, it can pay back, and it could invest, there where it's best for the climate, and not like, say, just the rich countries, because at one point Germany is already, because of some restrictions we have, running out of places for windmills. That's another topic, but still, like, why do we always are so focused on just Germany, you know, just Germany building windmills, when we have like so many countries around us where we could invest as well, and then like transfer the energy. It's so much national, this view of the climate crisis, which makes no sense. It should be a world view, yes, but a world government is far in the future, and the next step would be the European Union. And we should really foster this Europeanism, to think like we are all sitting in the same boat, and let's do it together.
I couldn't have said it better, honestly. I mean, this would truly be a dream come true. I mean, this is, if we would have one day, you know, EU financial ministry and a minister, and have true common borrowing, and make EU common decisions, and not just on a you know, national level. And maybe as a last word to it, even if you don't buy into this argument, let's be solidaric to each other and think commonly and as on an EU basis, it also would be just more economically sound to actually do some of the things jointly, right? If you think about the railway system, like Germany, for example, on its own, we're exporting big time into the EU, yet our railway system stops on national borders, right? So the Deutsche Bahn is responsible for Germany and the French version of it there, but they can't do any joint projects, which would just be actually so much more, you could save so many costs and make it more efficient if you could actually plan together, instead of creating redundancies. Everyone does his own, they have to hire the same people again and again. You know, if you do things together, you would also just save money and make it more efficient for everyone. So yeah, there's so many benefits to it that are just currently not seen or discussed at all.
Yeah, being European saves money. Not only this.
And the climate.
Yes, 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 yes. That's what we said in the beginning. You know, it's all about the money in the end. And when we save money, we have more money to rescue, to protect the climate, and to be resilient about it. Yes.
So yeah, in the
Annika.
words of Karina, it's like turning the vicious circle into a benevolent one.
Oh, I like that.
As Volt will be able to contribute to.
Yes, turning the vicious circle into a benevolent circle. I like that. All right. Thanks a lot for this talk. Thanks a lot to all the viewers who watched it. Follow Annika, follow me if you come from Annika, follow all the other people of Team Europe, follow Volt, see what we are doing. I hope you enjoyed this little talk of us. Any feedback, just write it in the comments or tell me via direct messages. I'd like to see you again sometime in the chat and everywhere else. And maybe if you liked it, I will do another one with someone else. And let's see. But Annika, I wish you all the best in your move to politics and change the world for the better.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure and nice seeing you all, the people who watched.
All right. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.